Reskilling for the Future, a Reskilling for the Future working group. My name is Noah Gaffney, and I am the Executive Director for the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation. As many of you know, we're an institute focused on the many ways that business can make a positive impact on society. And what's really exciting about us is that we're housed in one of the most diverse institutions in the country. So across all our lines of work, whether we're looking at the future of work, climate change, or health, everything is underpinned by this commitment to equity and social justice. So this piece is part of our ongoing initiative around the future of work, which kicked off several months ago with a big event. We held a virtual event with over 150 people. I believe several of you were there. And one of the outcomes of that event was this reskilling working group. So we saw that there was a lot of energy around this idea of reskilling for the future, particularly locally across the state of New Jersey. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Professor Gina Wartenberg, who's our Associate Director, and she has a fantastic background in both corporate social innovation as well as human resources, and she'll be leading this working group. And so with that, I'm delighted to hand it over to Gina. Thank you.
Great. So I'm very, very excited to welcome all of you today at what promises to be a seminal meeting. As they say, it takes a village. And we have so many wonderful colleagues, as you can see in the chat, from many great companies, including Audible, Church & Dwight, PSEG, Prudential, Samsung, Panasonic, ETS, Ernst & Young, Deloitte, PwC, Human Capital Investment and Reporting Council, Threefold Leadership, Transitioning to Green, plus New Jersey government, including Department of Labor, New Jersey Office of Innovation, the Office of Higher Education, the New Jersey Employment and Training Commission, the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, Crafty Lab, CareWise Solutions, plus Rutgers Heldrich Center for Workforce Development. We're thrilled to be partnering with you, and a number of Rutgers Business School faculty and students. So I wanted to take a minute to go over the agenda for today. Thank you, Noah, our wonderful Executive Director, for introducing our session today. And what we're going to do is I'm going to do a summary of the Reskilling for the Future working paper that I wrote with support from my colleagues John Sarno and Sam Couchy. Then John is going to talk about a specific initiative that came out of the March 26th event, which focused on portable individual training accounts. And then Sam Couchy, the CEO and founder of One Huddle, is going to give us an exciting presentation on technology and its disruptive role in reskilling for the future of work. We've had the opportunity to work with Sam and John and are incredibly impressed about how this all can come together with all of your support and partnership. By 11 o'clock, our plan is to be complete with all of those presentations, and we'll try to be rigorous about that, so that we have a half hour for breakouts. We're going to do 4 randomized breakouts, so you'll all be in different groups, and we're going to focus on 4 questions. First, we want to get your comments and feedback on the working paper and the presentations. We want to know what success looks like for this initiative, and I'll explain all about the initiative. And what do you hope to get out of this? And even more important, what do you hope to contribute? We will talk about what do you see as the key roles and responsibilities to ensure its success, because this is a collaborative effort. Each of the 4 brainstorming breakouts will have a facilitator, and they or someone from the group who volunteers can do the readout of what you discussed, and we'll capture all that in notes. Following that, we're going to talk about how we can share key related initiatives, and there are so many. I have been just amazed at how much incredible work is going on every day. There's breaking news. Many of you are leading exciting initiatives related to the future of work, and we want to have a way to share that. We will set up a Google Drive, et cetera. And We will be scheduling monthly virtual meetings. I have the dates. They're Wednesday mornings from 10 to 12. I'll go over the dates and then we'll close. There will be a recording. Deborah's recording the meeting, and we will share the recording after the meeting, along with the notes. Okay, so what is the purpose of this? So as Noah said, this came out of the meeting we had on March 26th, which many of you attended. And that meeting included people from various subject matter experts, as well as people from all different partners, organizations. So what is our intention? Our intention is to really take a step back and convene a group of experts and volunteers, as well as students who represent the next generation, to create meaningful, _meaningful, purpose-driven, and equitable employment, _equitable, in the context of the future of work, to serve the skill development needs of all stakeholders in society, all stakeholders, while incorporating principles of social responsibility, sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in that large purpose, we've carved out 4 immediate focus or focal points for the initiative over the next 4 months. This project will culminate this phase in December, at which point we will write a report and have recommendations for what we're going to do in 2022 going forward. So step 1 is we want to analyze the current situation. What's going on now? We've been gathering a tremendous amount of information. It's changing every day. So where do things stand now as it relates to skill development of current and future employees? Second, what are the critical skills needed by employers for the future workforce? And we're taking pretty much of a long-term view because skills development takes time. So we're looking at the next 3 to 10 years. And third, how do people access? What are the pathways for skill development? What are the barriers? What are the stigmas? What are the things that are standing in the way? And how do we remove those barriers? How do we make skill development accessible to everyone? And today we'll talk a lot more about that. And then fourthly, most important, we want to have viable solutions. So today we're going to talk about, John's going to actually talk about one of the solutions that came out of our March 26th event, but we want to also look at different solutions, and we're going to be doing that through a 4-pillar model framework that Rixie has created. So why do we need to I know I'm speaking to the choir here. Why do we need to reskill the American workforce? So first point in terms of long-term unemployment. So long-term unemployment currently has over 4 million Americans out of work for 6 months or more. That's what we call long-term unemployment, including an estimated 1.5 million workers in white-collar occupations. And according to the data that I was looking at, it's at a 60-year high post-COVID. And the stigma associated with unemployment, which is inherent in age and hiring biases, as well as people's loss in their self-confidence, their doubts about themselves, pose significant challenges, as well as opportunities. There's a wonderful Harvard Business Review article I'll share about long-term unemployment and how it affects people's psychology. Second, job turnover. So what we're seeing is a tremendous amount of job turnover. SHRM's research, for example, showed that more than half of employees in North America plan to look for a new job in 2021. And a quarter of employees plan to quit their jobs outright after the pandemic subsides. Lots of contributors to this exodus include focus on comp and benefits, but a major factor is work-life balance. In terms of relocation of skilled talent, we had a recent workforce pulse survey by PwC, and I want to acknowledge we have PwC represented here. And they found that relocation during and after the pandemic is on the upswing, especially for those with flexibility and mobility as people have been relocating. 12% of employees in PwC's Pulse survey have already moved since the beginning of the pandemic. Almost a quarter of them are either considering or planning to move more than 50 miles from their core office locations. And of course, younger workers are more likely than older workers to be considering or planning to make a temporary or permanent move, according to PwC. And finally, employee engagement, which is very near and dear to my heart. Talk a lot about this in my classes. What we want to do is similar to what Andy Hoffman wrote in his recent book, Management as a Calling. We want to have employees become engaged in their work by finding meaning and purpose. Astonishingly, recent surveys showed that only 21% of employees say they're engaged at work, and 1 in 5 feel under or unappreciated. 43% of Gen Zs do not feel valued at work. So we believe this is a pivotal moment in time for re-engaging and reskilling workers for the next decade and beyond. And at the same time, afford these workers the opportunity to contribute to society's greatest challenges. Creating a sustainable future is the greatest challenge facing humanity today. So offering opportunities for direct or indirect participation in solving these challenges can provide the much needed meaning that millennials and Gen Z workers are searching for. So in a nutshell, we want to reframe work as a calling. So what are the critical skills needed for the future? At the recent Future of Work Symposium, our keynote speaker, Kathy Kelvin, who was the former CEO of the United Nations Foundation, shared her view that this is the first time since the Industrial Revolution that we have the opportunity to redesign what work really means, and that a reset is needed to better line up with the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. Kathy predicted that the skill sets of the future include what you see here: being collaborative, not competitive, being unafraid to stand up and speak up, being resilient and learning how to recover from setbacks, working from a place of purpose and meaning, as I mentioned, and having a commitment to being a champion for the SDGs. A recent study by PwC found that these were the skills that were seen as most critical for the future career path. So you see problem solving, the ability to learn new skills and apply them quickly, adaptability, critical thinking, innovation, creativity, and leadership skills are really important. And what you notice here is a lot of these are the soft skills, what we call the soft skills. And the soft skills are really the hard skills, emotional intelligence, et cetera. And then as Sam will talk about, digital skills. I just want to say one more thing on this chart here. The World Economic Forum launched the Reskilling Revolution initiative in 2020, and they want to provide 1 billion people with better education, skills, and jobs by 2030. They pointed out that the pandemic has accelerated the need for change by disrupting economic activity and fast-tracking automation and digitization. So it's created both devastation across labor markets, but giant opportunities for online learning, redeployment, and re-employment. Okay, so how can we contribute to Reskilling American initiative? So in the Future of Work after COVID Symposium, one of the breakout groups focused on reskilling for the long term. And while employee training needs to be continuous and lifelong, it was pointed out that government and tax codes in relation to training are severely outdated. As Peter Capelli from the Wharton School recommended in his wonderful book, Why Smart People Can't Get Jobs, corporations need to back off the strict requirement that applicants have to have previously performed the exact tasks needed for the vacant job, and rather begin more frequently hiring candidates who have broad skills, are emotionally intelligent and smart, and then train them for the job with a period to ramp up. As the Rixey report discussed, keeping the workforce current and future oriented is critical, and must take into account the disruptive impact of technology that's so pervasive in the fourth industrial revolution. So companies are increasingly looking for ways to keep their employees connected through mobile and remote technology, including, for example, gamification and virtual reality, while raising their skills and knowledge. Sam Cauchi, CEO of One Huddle, is going to talk more about this, and he calls this shared responsibility, where everyone has access to training to help people rise up or broaden laterally to follow their own dreams while benefiting their employer by enhancing their skills and knowledge and positioning them to be strong players. Okay. So how do we address all this? And we thought a lot about this and came up with this great idea, which hopefully will work, which would be to apply the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation 4-pillar framework to these reskilling challenges and opportunities that I just described. So first, let me say a few words about what is corporate social innovation. So corporate social innovation, CSI, is really a new, relatively new, evolving field. And it's poised to make a transformative impact on the greatest challenges facing society, fueled by radically changing perceptions around the role of business. For example, the Business Roundtable. For example, Larry Fink, BlackRock's letter to CEOs. For example, stakeholder capitalism. So CSI is seizing on this momentum for businesses to find innovative, sustainable paths forward to rebuild society. Now, let me say a few brief words about each of the 4 pillars in our model. So what we plan to do is have each of the next 4 reskilling working groups enable everyone to come together and come up with brainstorm ideas and explore potential reskilling solutions, looking through each of the 4 lenses of the framework. Let's start with giving back to society. So giving back to society focuses on strategic philanthropy, that people can actually be giving money in ways that are strategic to their company and related to their goals, corporate social responsibility, as well as corporate volunteering. So there's a tremendous pent-up interest in volunteerism. Maybe we could apply some of that to solving some of these problems from companies. The second one is called aligning profit and purpose. And what this involves is shared value, creating shared value, or CSV, as well as purpose-driven leadership, which is very important. And it incorporates B corporations. The third one is responsible business practices. This is the one where we're going to focus on environmental, social, and governance, ESG, which is extremely important. And actually, there's another major initiative that PwC has initiated around ESG, and they can talk more about that later. As well as I saw Congress just passed a new law, which has to still get through the Senate, around disclosures, as well as the SEC. So there's a lot going on with ESG. And that would also incorporate paying a living wage, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have some very expert people who are deeply engaged in work related to DEI, as well as stakeholder capitalism. And finally, advocacy, activism, and public policy, which is a hallmark of successfully socially innovative companies. And we'll be looking at public-private partnerships in that regard. Okay, so I think I'm right on time. And so I'm just going to say a few words about this and turn it over to John. This initiative came out of the last session. And as I mentioned, it was a big idea to create portable individual training accounts. So I'm going to turn it over to John, and you can explain that and your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gina and Noah. I think we have the right people in the room to talk about a concept, a program that's whose time has come, and to bring to fruition, hopefully in the next few months. So over the last 15 months or so, I've been working with employers to get them through and on the other side of the pandemic. And a part of my work over the last few weeks, at least, has been to do quite a bit of research and understand how trauma impacts our ability to move forward, and how we put our lives back together after going through a traumatic experience, or for those of us who have experienced trauma in our own lives. And one of the psychological impacts of trauma is a kind of disassembling of the memory. And it's even now difficult to remember what our lives were like prior to the pandemic. But prior to the pandemic, New Jersey was really at a tipping point. Its economy and its our society generally. In 2018, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported robust job growth in New Jersey, but at the same time, a steep decline in wages. And so I called the economist over there and I asked, am I reading this correctly? Are we creating jobs, moving toward what we were calling a full employment economy, but simultaneously are wages going down? And the answer to that is absolutely true. So what we were doing is creating low wage jobs in a service economy. We see evidence of that today. Manufacturing jobs, which typically would pay more than other industries, are paying the equivalent of fast food jobs. Folks who are on enhanced unemployment insurance have made the rational economic choice to not go back to work, because for tens of thousands of people in New Jersey, it doesn't pay to work. And that's direct evidence. So on the eve of the pandemic, we were in peril, getting very close to a sort of vicious cycle of job growth on the lower income scale. 60% of the states, now we surveyed, EA&J surveyed, we had focus groups pre-pandemic, during pandemic, continuing. 60% of our members, 60% of the state's employers reported that the shortage of skilled workers was impacting the bottom line. That is to say, the shortage of skilled workers was an impediment to economic development. At the same time, Gina had referenced this, New Jersey was 47th, third from the bottom in the country on chronic long-term unemployment, and 36% in underemployment. That is to say, we're producing highly educated people from tremendous institutions of higher education. 2 out of 10 jobs in New Jersey, only 2 out of 10 actually require a college degree. So in short, on the eve of the public health crisis, we were, as I said, in peril of a total underinvestment in skills, and as I'll explain briefly, a lack of capital investment, because those two things go together, right? Companies that invest in machinery, technology, also need to invest in their people to operate those new machines, we'll say, and you can't have one without the other. So we were in very difficult straits going into the pandemic. The pandemic only exacerbated those problems. It crystallized the enormous immorality of the inequities of the economy. And this is what we are faced with today. The use of public funds, the current system for delivering the work development programs, skills development. And I know many of you on the line today, we've dedicated ourselves to helping workers thrive. We know that the use of public funds, public infrastructure has its limitations. Let me just briefly go through those limitations. First, we don't have a lot of employers in New Jersey that are good candidates for public funds. They lack HR strategies, and they are typically not able or willing to make the capital investments that are necessary in the investments in people. So, and the pay scales are not competitive, quite frankly. So we have hundreds of millions of dollars in funds to use, but quite frankly, we do not have a lot of businesses in New Jersey that are good candidates for to optimize the use of those funds. Secondly, employers in New Jersey, not all, but most, we're a small business state, treat employees one of two ways. It depends on how you pay them. Employees are treated as totally fungible in the service economy. Investments in their training are absolutely minimal. On the high-end scale, where we have skilled technicians, professionals, managers, employees are treated as proprietary resources. So the way we treat employees and the way we treat our workers are not compatible, quite frankly, with the public delivery of we'll call it upskilling strategies. Thirdly, as I mentioned, we simply do not have the critical mass of industry that are making the type of capital investments in machinery and in technology, which would require them to then upskill their workforce. So, and then finally, employers, because of this ecosystem, right? Employers report that their employees are not interested in upskilling. Conversely, the employees say that their employers show little interest in investing in them. So what we have is, as Gina flagged for us, 2/3 of the workforce are simply unengaged, totally unengaged. And this to me is a tremendous failure of human resource management, which is part of the conversation, but a separate conversation. So the use of public funds and the infrastructure to deliver those funds did not save us from getting to that tipping point. And you know that. Many of you are more expert than certainly I am, and this has been your life's work. And I know you're absolutely on the same page with this. So we need new solutions. And we need to innovate in this space. So it is our operating assumption with the training accounts that only with skin in the game can both employers and employees succeed, because they're motivated to get the return on their investment. For the employer, the return on the investment is in their business, and for the worker, the return on her investment is in her in herself. So whether we call this a savings account, a training account, a lifelong learning account, concept is pretty straightforward. It's a fund. We'll analogize to a retirement account where both the employee and the employer contribute. And if we analogize to, say, a 401k plan, there may be a schedule of contributions, or the employer may choose not to contribute. But in either case, it's a vested account that both the employer and the employee can contribute to, that is owned by the employee. Now, what does this ownership do? What does this investment do? It creates a partnership. So, and when one partner succeeds, the other partner succeeds. The partnership succeeds. And each party, the employer and the employee, is invested in their own success. It requires, as we'll talk about perhaps some of the details in one of the breakout sessions, as we start, filling that in and drilling down, it does require an investment in time. It requires a training strategy. The employee cannot be treated as neither fungible nor as a proprietary property that the employer owns. There's a robust role for governance and infrastructure, because the investment, the money that's invested has to be used, and it has to be used on training on specific areas, so that so there's a role for credentialing, certification, a centralized location for that. It could be a public-private partnership. And we have some models that we can look at. I understand that the governor's budget has a appropriation for a pilot program, which I intend to participate in, and which we hope might seed or fuel some of the innovation in this area. So I really do think we have the right people in the room for this discussion. But beyond that, we need action, and we need to work toward actual fruition of the concept. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, who will be discussing the also critical part of the piece, which is how the training gets delivered, which is how the fund gets optimized, which more and more is obviously a technological platform. So Sam Cauchi, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. We had one more slide, John. Deborah, if you want to move it to the next slide. If you want to say anything about the Governors Association.
Well, it's an idea whose time has come. I mean, it's for most of you, this is a reaffirmation. I know it is. It's a reaffirmation of what you already know and already have experienced in your own work. So we're really restarting, right? We're really restarting. So this idea of putting the consumer, which is the employer and the employee, in the center of the process, and then letting the consumer drive the process, because it's their money. They are motivated to get their return on investment. So it's an idea that's been on part of the Governors Association's radar for some time, right? Because of those 4 reasons that I've indicated of why the current system has limitations, and how public dollars are always following. The public system lags behind always because of the demographic, technological, and financial development in the private sector. So the Governors Association has understood, and so has the vast public policy bench has understood that the current system that really doesn't work well. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I gave you my 4 reasons as to what those limitations are, at least in New Jersey.
Okay, thank you, John. That was great. And now we're going to turn over to the founder and CEO of One Huddle, Sam Couchy. Take it away.
Very good. Hey, everybody. How are you today? Excited to be here. Great stuff so far. And I know we got a lot of good stuff coming right up. So to kick us off, and I'll direct us to next slide here. I don't think I'm in control. Anybody here remember their first job? Raise your hand, show of hands. Anybody remember their first job? I remember my first job. And, you know, I'm from South Florida. So my first job was, I applied to a Gold's Gym and I got hired, and I was lucky enough to show up on my first day. And I don't know, I was 18 and thought they were going to hire me to be a personal trainer, which would be really fun. And I showed up on my first day at 7 a.m. in the middle of the morning fitness club rush. The owner of the Gold's Gym franchise was working the front desk. And after greeting me, he threw me a monstrosity of a training manual. And he said, you know, sort of good luck. It's like, we're going to do some training in the afternoon, but I'm just going to get you started here. He went out and worked out on the gym floor. I spent the next 4 hours screwing up the entire business. I'm pretty sure I charged some people wrong dues to the wrong memberships. I definitely didn't know how to make a protein shake the right way. When the 4 hours was up, it was break time. I went out to my car. I never came back. Next slide, please. You know, the workforce is changing pretty dramatically. You know, never before have we seen 5 different generations at work at the same time. I'm not going to pick on my fellow millennials, but we have, you know, 55% of our workforce today being millennial and Gen Z. And I feel like this is important to set the table as we talk about technology and where it can help. Next slide. The workforce changing is a challenge, but one of the things that's also a challenge is the fact that most of what we're doing from a technology perspective is stuck in yesterday. 91% of corporate training and learning today is done the old-fashioned way. Watch a module, take a quiz, or through stand and deliver seminars and instruction. And I'm bringing this up, next slide, please, because the problem is we're not even sure what's working. So while I pick on that delivery, a Harvard study about 6 or 7 years ago made the point that 87% of what you learn in a traditional classroom training or workshop is forgotten within 30 days. If I were to quiz one of my team members on the last book they read, they probably wouldn't fare so well. So this isn't to pick on the training content. It's science. It's the way that our brain learns. A lot of us here are familiar with my next slide, which is the forgetting curve, where you can make the claim that you forget up to 70% of what you learn within as little as 72 hours. Okay. We see this as a major problem today as we think about job skilling people up quickly. My next slide reiterates a point that Gina made earlier. John seconded on. Employee engagement is a real problem. Today, according to Gallup, I know we had a number that was shared here in the US. Gallup, one of my favorite books off the shelf, wrote a book pre-pandemic called It's the Manager. and they looked at the global workforce. They're one of the most broad surveys and studies on the future of work. They found that only 15% of the global workforce is, quote, excited about work every day. And it makes sense if we think about the fact that 1 in 2 American jobs today are bad jobs, paying folks below the poverty line. It also makes sense that workers are, I would go beyond disengaged and say they might be a little bit, I don't have an expletive, but disappointed is maybe a good word. I've seen even recently over the last few months, several departments of labor across the country lean in to portals being added to their site to report workers who are not willing to show up to work. The same workers we considered heroes are now lazy. As John said, I think John mentioned we have, one of his points requires another webinar. That one probably requires a special happy hour to discuss on how we got to a place of calling workers lazy. So I would say that this all contributes. Next slide, please. Gina made the point of a SHRM study talking about this turnover tsunami from a SHRM report that found that half of employees surveyed in this SHRM study found that they might look for a new job once the effects of the pandemic are over. So thank you for letting me set the table on this one. I think it's important because as we shift into what's the role of technology, where can it really make an impact? Next slide, please. Let's talk about some of the ideas where we think technology can play a powerful role in reskilling workers. Only 1% of job training today is mobile first. I run a company that's a technology startup in Newark. As a technology startup in Newark, we turn workforce training into mobile games. I've been blown away at how the infrastructure within our American workforce and globally, it does not lean into meeting workers where they are when it comes to workforce training, education, mentorship, coaching. We work really hard to meet our customers where they are, but mobile is a tremendous opportunity for us today. As workers move through the workforce and shift from job to job, we just can't expect that workers can get, we just have to have the understanding that we're going to have to create opportunities for workers and the freedom to be able to skill up, to reskill, to access new education, maybe on the edges of their day. This problem of workforce training only being mobile, or excuse me, this problem of it not being mobile disproportionately impacts frontline workers and low wage workers, workers who are not going to be put on the clock for job skill training. We are seeing, from a disappointing perspective, a major challenge today with companies who are not investing in new workforce technology out of fear of what type of impact that can have on them when it comes to wage and hour, what type of impact that can have on them when it comes to exposure with an intention to skill workers. So mobile technology is a challenge because there's a lot of legislation. Gina brought this up. There's a lot of rules, particularly in the FLSA when it comes to wage and hour. There's a lot of rules that were written with the intention of helping and protecting workers that in some ways are holding workers back, especially today in technology. Some recommendations. We need to leverage technology to make job skill training more accessible wherever a worker sits. Today, like I mentioned, blockers include outdated labor rules on the government side, but it's important that it also includes weak infrastructure on the part of private sector companies, companies who will spend and spend and spend for their for certain workers, but not for everybody. To point number 2 that you see, leveraging the second point where technology can play a role is in leveraging the advancement of learning science. There's a tremendous amount of research today arguing to the point that there's nothing wrong with job skill training being fun. Like, there's nothing that's going to take away from it from being engaging. There's nothing that's, just because something is serious doesn't mean we can't think outside the box on how to tap into technology to bring the most out of our workers. One of my favorite books off the shelf is called Make It Stick. A good friend of ours, Peter Brown, wrote it along with some folks who have way too many letters after their name for me to repeat. And I want to read real quick, kind of like story time. I'll read this one passage because this is an important one. They talk about difficulties being critical to the learning process, saying that when you watch the module and take the quiz, it's not hard enough. That's why the material leaks and it's forgotten. And I'm a big believer, if we're going to do job skill training, let's make it work the first time. Quote from the book says, trying to come up with an answer rather than having it presented to you, or trying to solve a problem before you're shown the solution, it leads to better learning and longer retention of the correct answer or solution, even when your attempt is wrong. Can't fear failure. Some of the most powerful, and a lot of our teachers and professors and academics on the phone or on the call here know this, learning through struggle is critical. That's why we're excited at how many organizations are using gamification, are using struggle-based learning methods in lieu of just, like I mentioned, not to pick on it, to watch the module, take the quiz, that big manual that was thrown at me that I never read. And even if I did, I don't think it would have made an impact. We got to leverage these great learnings that are available today. So our recommendations are organizations, while we think about it using technology, can we use technology that's built for the 21st century and not the 20th century? We know that learning management systems that a lot of companies lean on when it comes to job skill training are often looked at as a check the box. I cannot tell you how many conversations I have with C-level executives that say, training is, we got to, it's a nice to have, not a need to have. We have to change that perspective. To my final point here on, if you could, thank you. We need to make the invisible visible. A lot of folks here are familiar with the conversation around hidden credentials today in our workforce. We conducted our own workforce survey on brands that we work with. A few months ago, we found on a survey of over 500 CHROs, only 1 in 10 said they have a 52-week-a-year continuous training and development program for every worker. That, I say, sets up a challenge because we know that folks in our workforce, especially low-wage frontline, are acquiring credentials, are acquiring experiences, are acquiring skills, but because it's not a 4-year degree or a certificate that somebody stamped from an organization, and it's really tough for them to display onto their next job. I think this is an area where technology can play a major role and is already playing a major role. Our recommendations are to leverage technology to rethink the credential. Like I mentioned, there are many great products in the market that are finding ways to use technology to display hidden experiences and credentials that signal the job preparedness of a worker, and helping them to take that and display it on their resume or move from job to job with it. But the second area is, most workers today, especially low wage and frontline, for this group, the training and credentials they often unlock within an organization isn't movable. For a wide array of food and beverage, hospitality, service sector, retail jobs, in these roles, when you're terminated, when you're furloughed, when you voluntarily leave, one of the first things we do is we turn off your access to everything, which makes it really tough for workers in positions where these skills and credentials are really critical to signaling for their next role. They don't have anything that they can take with them. So we're advocates for a movable credential that is the property of the worker. No different than those familiar with GDPR requirements in Europe, which is coming to the US, where you have the right to be forgotten as a consumer because you own your data. We think the same philosophy of the worker owns every experience they have. They can take that with them from job to job is an area that technology can disrupt. But we still live in a time where the majority of the workforce technology solutions, they see the company as their customer and not the worker. And we need to move in a direction where everybody sees the worker as their customer, which would open up and unlock the ability for the invisible to be visible. So those are our 3 suggestions. Meet workers where they're at. You got to leverage the latest advancements. Go buy, make it stick. It's a cool book. Rethink how you prepare or retain your next reading on your next flight. And then we need to make the invisible visible. As I close on the next slide, I find a lot of folks asking whether we're talking to customers or we're talking to vendors or we're talking to workers. This discussion around whose job this is, and that was with dramatic effect. It's everybody's job. So I'm excited to be a part of what's to come here with this group. A lot of great people around this webinar and through the Rutgers program. But I would impress upon you as we move forward, it's all of our jobs to find a way to lift up every worker. With that, Gina, back to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So you've been great listeners, and now it's your turn. What we're going to do is at exactly 11 o'clock, we're going to form 4 breakout groups. About 10 people will be in each. Take a minute to introduce yourselves. We have facilitator for each one. Noah Gaffney, who you met earlier, will be facilitating one group. I'll be facilitating a second. Sharon Hellman, my wonderful colleague from Rutgers, professor, will be facilitating a third group. And Linda Morris Kelly, my colleague and co-author of the Sustainable Enterprise Field Book, will be facilitating the 4th one. So you have about 2 minutes if you need to get some coffee or take a quick break. And at 11 o'clock, we're going to form these breakouts. There will be 4 questions discussed, and after you introduce yourselves to each other, and then one person could be the facilitator, or even better, might be somebody from the group could take notes and share what your group came up with after 30 minutes. So these are the 4 questions. What comments and feedback do you have about all that you've just heard? I know it was a lot, a little bit of a fire hose. What does success look like for this initiative? What would it mean for you if you saw this being successful? 2 sides of the coin. What do you hope to get out of this? And please be authentic if you have a particular agenda that you'd like to put on the table, so we're all being transparent. And what do you hope to contribute? And finally, if we set up roles and responsibilities, because this is a working group, this is not just straight one-way presentation, but actually we're going to work together collaboratively. What do you see some of the key roles and responsibilities of the task force members would be to ensure its success? So with that, we'll see you at 11:30, and we're going to have the group start at exactly 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I might have missed my invitation to join a group.
Me too.
I don't see a pop-up or anything, do you?
No, me neither.
There are no pop-ups yet. I think they will be like within the minute.
Oh, okay.
We'll be
Excellent.
opening the rooms in the next couple of seconds.
Oh, perfect.
share your insights with her. So Gina, why don't you kick it off?
Okay, great. So we had a very deep and wide spanning conversation, and our colleague from ETS, Laura Hullinger, has agreed to summarize our session. And she's the Senior Director of New Product Development at the Educational Testing Service. Laura?
Hi, everyone. I wasn't able to join the beginning of today's call, but I was happy to be able to join during the breakout. And like Gina said, I took some notes during the conversation. So we talked about a number of things across all of the parts of the conversation and across all the members of the breakout room. So some of the things that we discussed were the fact that the issues that are being discussed now have been very long-standing, and that there have been many efforts in prior times to actually try to work through these same exact kinds of problems, and that we still haven't quite figured out how to go about that and how to figure out the ways in which we can do the work of problem solving these different pieces. We also talked about the fact that there is difference between the way that companies talk about their need for talent, their need for upskilling employees, the things that they need to see in employees, for example, and the way in which they actually advertise their information or the things that they share in terms of upskilling. Jobs are uncertain and unstable, and just being able to try to figure out what is that missing gap, and what's that split in terms of the missing piece that we haven't been able to quite identify yet, and might that potentially be a part of the problem with why it's long-standing. So we spent some time talking about that, as well as the fact that there are issues across the world that are also impacting the work in the United States and the work elsewhere as well, just in terms of stability. And some of those are political issues. And so we often, as members of this breakout, also piggybacked on what others said, thinking again about the disconnect between what employers are saying that they want and need, and also what training is being provided and what opportunities are there for upskilling, and also making sure that all of the individuals who bring to the table diverse perspectives, diverse backgrounds, different pieces that are beneficial to all of us working in different areas, that they have the opportunity to be at the table to provide their thinking, as well as be a part of these kinds of training opportunities. We have to have solutions for all of these different pieces. We talked about having metrics to be able to understand what success is, and to be able to look at longevity and to people being retained at different companies. What is it that is the reason why people leave? Is it because they're not valued? Is it because of other issues that are specifically related to family life, for example, whether that might be care for children or care for their own parents, and just being able to leverage all that information to help to fill in those gaps. And I think I would end it by saying that we kind of ended the conversation with thinking about what the ideal future of work is, and that everybody who wants to be able to work and is able to work actually has the opportunity to do that in a place that provides them security and benefits that are helpful to them, and being able to provide for their families. We don't have a place or a system in place that's able to provide for that right now, and to help that to be supported, and just being able to determine how we might as a group be able to help in that respect. Gina, is there anything that you think that I left out or passed over too quickly that you'd like to add detail for?
You did a really great job capturing a lot of conversations. There were a couple of ideas that people had, specific ideas that I think we can explore at our next meeting or between the meetings. One was an idea that was floated around focusing on the team leader, and what would they need to make it be successful, kind of a pilot of 3 to 4 companies focused on what does success look like. Asking both the employees and the team leaders, what are the key skills that you need, and what would you need to stay and to be engaged. Also focusing on the ERGs, I think was a big idea, to And a couple of other comments on, again, as you said, how to define a quality job, including access to skill building. And Lisa had some really interesting comments on women, some of the issues that are being floated around women's unwillingness or quitting, being somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there was a lot of great conversation, and I'll leave it at that. I did capture a lot of notes, so we will capture all that. Thank you so much, Laura. And now, how about if we hear from Noah or your group?
Great, thank you so much. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Ron Venkatraman, who is the Managing Director of People Advisory Services at EY.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been a great session, and thanks to all the members in my group, Group 2, and great facilitation from Nova as well. It was such a diverse and enriching point of views, covering almost all the dimensions that we talked about. From Laura, whatever she covered, I'm going to echo some of the sentiments and not repeat some of those and add on to those factors. A couple of key elements that came in, and I thought that'll be a good idea to put that as a framework or some of the constructs for the framework that we're talking about, or technology, the pros and cons. How do we avoid a digital divide or bringing it to the a common platform? The second one was equity. Equity was across the board, in terms of multiple diversities that were mentioned and the various other conversations. I'll double click on some of these, but I just wanted to give you the list. And then the people or workforce, the voice of the workforce is one of the key areas that came in. It's important to get the sentiments of the workforce on upskilling and the various future of work. And the other important aspect, especially from the portable training accounts, the team chimed in with the what resonates, the policy aspects. I mean, how we shift this from, if compliance is required, policies and governance is required, but how do we shift it to an employee experience or a workforce experience? And more from, reducing, this was not explicitly called out, more from allowing the workforce to be agile and getting into the next career path, and reducing stress overall. I mean, the mental well-being. And we talked about disability in education and in the post-pandemic, and or some affordability on the trainings or education in general was also called out. But let me double click on some of these things. We talked about future of work, especially this cross-selling, upskilling is one of the key areas. Why is this so important now? I mean, the pandemic has already been a big, switching point. People have started thinking, probably they had enough time back at home to start thinking, do some soul searching. We say the question is, why now? This is both a trigger and an accelerator for things that has been held for long on the table behind the scene. So that was, the pre and post-pandemic need analysis has come in. And somebody commented about the demand. There is a clear demand and evidence for the demand of upskilling is there. And there was also another topic came out from, lucky to have somebody from DOL to talk about, hey, there is a public data available. How do we leverage, synergize public DOL data plus private data into bringing in a very informed decision and kind of a point of view as part of this forum. So that is another thing that was called out. And there were other areas I don't want to forget is the types of training, the holistic training, and what is the need for mobility and bringing in policy agenda into these mixes. I mean, those were some of the other topics that was covered. But I think in a nutshell, it was a diverse point of views across those 5 or 6 items that I called out: people, process, technology, if you want to call it, leverage data, and then bring in equity as one of the key areas for this one. I'll pause there. Noah, if I missed something, feel free to add to this.
Thank you. No, I think that's fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, that was awesome. Thank you, Ram. And thank you, Noah. Okay, how about if we hear from Sharon Hellman now?
So actually, Benoit Sethi from our group will speak. Benoit's got extensive experience in corporate America, and at the beginning of the pandemic started her own consulting firm. So she will do a readout from our group.
Great. You're on mute.
Thank you. So I'll start with the overall comments from our team here, and the overall sort of idea around the entire topic was this idea of we're living in this world of contradiction and this world of complexity, where there's a lot going on around us. Some of the ideas were around, we heard earlier about the 5 generations of the workplace for the very first time, the idea of teaming, and the importance of having effective managers to really accelerate performance, engagement, and inclusion. The idea of hard skills, Dana, like you spoke about, being the soft skills around resilience, emotional agility, digital skills, etc. The idea of meeting the workers where they are. We are living in this world which is remote, virtual, global, and headed to a hybrid model is what it looks like. The dislocated workers, the new technology, and this idea of how we've learned as humans, as fundamentally we knew it's not worked in the past, and yet there's a lot of emphasis that we need to be relying on other ways of learning from a technology perspective. The other thing we talked about as it relates to the world of contradictions is that people are leaving jobs, and at the same time, we have displaced workers. So in a way, it sounds like we're sitting on this edge of a contradiction or a polarity at the same time. So those are some overall comments. In terms of what success looks like, we talked about listening and valuing the experience of people, learning from a worker's perspective, listening from a worker's perspective, and meeting the worker where they are. The second thing we talked about was paying attention to the fact that this is not really just a skill gap in the workers that we are talking about, but we are also acknowledging the reality that there's fundamentally this discrimination at many levels when it comes to the different dimensions of diversity around race, gender, sexual orientation, whatever that might be. But there is sort of this acknowledging the discrimination that is still occurring in a workplace. And I know both of you talked earlier about the inequity. So that's sort of where our discussion was pointing to. One of us talked about this idea that we've gotten this brutal lesson in inequality because of the pandemic. And so we have to keep that equity issue front and center, which it seems like it's been the theme of the other 2 debriefs that we just had. And then perspective from a, just give me a second here, I'm looking at my notes. And then yes, the aspect that we really want to come to this place of coming up with some very pragmatic solutions and really trying to see if we can break the problem in a way that we can solve it in a way that, especially in corporations where we are used to sort of defining and scoping the problem narrowly, so we don't make it so strong, so big and broad that we can't manage it. So can our recommendations be acted upon in terms of being short-term, mid-term, and long-term sort of deliverables? So this idea of being practical and tactical and really defining who our audience is, because it feels like the way this group is coming together is we do have 3 kind of segments. We have the academics, we have the government, and then we have the corporations. And how do we serve these 3 different personas? And then what do you get or contribute? So we talked about defining the problem clearly and describing it, like I said earlier, in terms of how do we scope it, and then come up with the potential solutions. Look at it from a DEI lens. I'll throw in a little bit of my own bias here around, we didn't really talk about that, but I also would love to look at it from a belonging perspective. As you know, Gina, I'm big on the topic of belonging, and that's what was coming up for me as I was listening to people talk here. And then again, just re-emphasizing that move away from the notion of just a skill gap, but also addressing the discrimination issue that is at hand, and having that open and honest conversation about those issues. Stressing on the worker aspect of the conversation, I think that resonated with a lot of people. I know, Sam, you talked a lot about that. So that was I think that was something that we talked a lot about. And then we talked about launching some kind of a pilot program that comes as a result of that we can actually apply it. So the idea of really being able to apply the work we create together is really something that we talked about a lot. And then building relationships amongst each other, sharing across the best practices around industries, from educators, from academics to corporations and business partners. Also recognizing that we have an opportunity to go wrong and perhaps create more inequity. So being really heightening our awareness around that we are really approaching that work in a way that it actually solves the problem and not creates more challenges. And then tactical action-oriented ideas, which corporations can really bring home and incorporate. And then the last piece was around roles and responsibilities of members. So we actually realized that we were a task force. So that was, for some of us, it was just an awareness around that. And so making the connections, leaning on each other's strengths. I'm a big believer of that. I think that's really important. And then optimizing each other's experiences to the best we can. So those were my notes that I took. I'll turn this over to Sharon, and maybe perhaps if you want to add anything that I may not have.
You got it all. That was an excellent summary. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. That was awesome. All right. Last but not least, Linda.
Okay, thank you. From our group, David Shore is going to do the report out. And so I am going to turn it over to David here. David is an assessment developer at the Educational Testing Service in Princeton. And it's all yours, David. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Linda. And obviously we're going last, so there's a lot of overlap here. So I'll try to keep it to things that we discussed that came up, that didn't come up earlier, or that didn't come up as much as maybe we would like them to. So one thing that came up in our group was collaboration. How do we make sure that everyone is heard, especially cross-industry collaboration, which sort of bleeds into something else that came up, which was a common nomenclature around these terms for skills. What does critical thinking mean? You know, how can we make sure that that's, if someone's credentialed for critical thinking or collaboration or something like that, how do we make sure that that speaks to one area in the country or across industry or something like that, so that they're not just getting siloed once again, or they're getting a credential or something that isn't meaningful to employers, right? So that's something that we feel needs to get hammered out. Simplification, what does workforce development mean? And what does, what are all of the, there's so many nuances to that, right? And especially folks were speaking about how New Jersey is a small business employment state. And small business owners don't necessarily have the time to trudge through all of the paperwork and the laws and everything behind business or small, employment development, sorry. So they don't have time to go through all of that, right? They're worried about growing their business and paying bills and everything. So how can we help simplify that work for them? And then customizable training. Can we make it so that people can train or upskill on their own time? A lot of folks, especially for underserved populations, might be working multiple jobs or might have families to take care of, things like that. So how can they train on their own time in a convenient way that's meaningful for them, and then also still speaks to, you know, better, bigger, better employment for them in the long term? And then similarly, access to tech, right? We've done a good job maybe bringing it to the front door. I love this quite. Forgive me, I can't remember who said it. We've done a good job bringing it to the front door of families and folks, but we haven't brought it in the door necessarily, right? The hardware isn't there for people to access, an internet connection, things like that. So making sure that access to these trainings is equitable. And then we also discussed training leadership, right? There's all this talk about employees needing to upskill, but employers don't necessarily know how to speak that language to employees or how to work with them to get them where they want them to be. They might not know how to foster collaborative environments, things like that. And let's see, just want to make sure. I think that's pretty much. I know I was speaking quickly, but I know we're also low on time. So yes, I will leave it at that. Linda, if you feel I left anything out, please feel free to speak up.
No, I think we're going to have many opportunities over the next few months to add to all of this. So thank you, David.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you, David, and thank you all the facilitators and the people that presented. You did an amazing job. So to close out, let me just briefly review the next steps and the meeting schedule. So I hope everybody appreciated today. A lot of work obviously went into creating it, and we'd love your feedback. Feel free to send, we don't have a formal feedback form or anything, but feel free to share your feedback after the meeting. What we're going to do going forward is, because there's such an incredible repository of valuable documents and information and initiatives already going on, we're going to have a Google Drive where we're going to share all that. And so if any of you have something you would like to share on that Google Drive, just send it to Deborah at rixie.director@business.rutgers.edu, the same email that invited you to this meeting, as well as if you'd like to send it to me, and we will post it because we'll organize it and all that kind of stuff. We will be scheduling 5 meetings coming up, as you see here. They will be Wednesdays 10 to 12. I'm sorry if that doesn't work for everybody. We try to find a schedule that worked as well as possible for the most people concerned around teaching and other schedules. But if you still want to stay involved and you can't make the meetings, that's okay too. We will keep you included. We will send you the notes and the recordings, and we will do our best to keep you involved. The next meeting will be July 21st from 10 to 12, and Deborah will send out calendar notices to everybody for this subsequent meetings. And then September 15th, October 27th, November 17th, which is the week before Thanksgiving, and December 15th will be our final meeting. We're hoping to have a report by the end of the year and summarize this with some go forward plans for the next year. If you're not a part of this working group already, I think there were a couple of people that were added at the last minute. Be sure to let us know your contact info so we can include you. Or if there's someone else that you think is critical to be included that's not already, do let us know. And so I want to thank everybody for your participation and your contributions in advance, your ideas. If you're interested in learning more about the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation, please contact us. We'll be happy to follow up. And thank you so much. I'll just leave it open for, we have a couple minutes. And if you want to chat any comments or say anything, I'm happy. We're all ears.
One final point, if I may. So we did discuss the budget proposal. So I think we'll keep a sharp out, all of us collectively, keep a sharp eye out for how that goes. And we're hoping that the Office on Innovation keeps us posted on that.
Okay, John, great. Thank you. Sam, you want to say anything?
No, this was a great session. I'm excited for the next one. I'm ready.
Okay, we'll be calling on you and everyone else to continue to fully participate. We had quite a few people and a fabulous session. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care. Thank you.
all.
Thank you. And thank you, Gina, for organizing.
Thank you. Noah.
Fantastic.
I appreciate it. It was a labor of love, as they say.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Excellent session. Thank you.
Thank you.